Intro, I'll do my intro, and then we'll get the conversation starting with Jerome, okay?
Yeah, so we're just,
Cool.
Hi everyone that's joining. We're just going to wait a few, as always, we're going to wait a few seconds just for everyone to join us today. It's a bit of a miserable weather here in the UK session. It's like winter.
It's been pretty cold in the Southern Hemisphere in the last couple of days, but not as cold as you would get in the Northern Hemisphere, Mel, for sure.
No, I haven't stopped wearing a jumper since October. You're lucky I'm not in a jumper now. Okay, so we're just going to wait a few more seconds for everyone to join us. So this is a new time for us, 1 o'clock. Last time we had it in the morning. So thank you for those of you that joined the previous session and also today's session. This is the second part in our series, Payroll Then versus Now, the evolution of technology. So we have our two great speakers today. Oh, sorry, the world is not flat, which is true, isn't it? There are some people that do believe it is, but you're going to prove us wrong today, aren't you? So we've got our two great speakers today. We've got Sachin and Jerome. So Sachin, would you like to introduce yourself to everyone?
Yeah, thanks, Mel, and it's good to be back. I know it was sometime in April we spoke about the overall then and now on high-level payroll, and now we're moving into what is a very topical conversation point about technology. And there's no way I'd be sitting here if it wasn't for someone like Jerome joining us. And I'll let Jerome introduce himself. But for us, it is looking at whether technology is the one that's changing the world in payroll and the payroll landscape, or is it technology and process, or is it the perception of technology? So that is why we termed and titled our presentation today as "The World is Not Flat." So with that said, I'd like to introduce everybody here to Jerome Gouvernel. Jerome's joined Pay Group after a very illustrious career and continuing to be a great career. Jerome, welcome, and thank you very much for sparing your time today for this webinar.
Hey, thanks, Sach. Very happy to be here, very excited to be here. I'll give you a little bit of my background. I think it might give some context for what I'm going to be rambling on about for the next half an hour or so. So I've, like I always say, I always knew from a young age that I wanted to do payroll. Like, when people wanted to be firemen and policemen, I wanted to do payroll. That's what I always felt was my calling. Of course, I'm joking. I had no idea that this was going to happen. But I think it's relevant because why did it keep my attention? Why is it keeping everybody's attention for a lifetime? Why is it that we've been doing this for decades? It sounds pretty dry and boring, but actually I don't think it is. And so that's what I want to talk about I want to talk about today why it's really, really interesting. And also the reason it's interesting is also what makes it so difficult. And that's also what makes it so slow to evolve in terms of technology. And it's also why technology itself, just by itself, isn't necessarily something that's going to solve all our problems. And that's what I want to talk about. But yeah, my background is I've been doing this my whole life. I spent 17 years with ADP, but actually it started out in Sydney, Australia, in a little startup that grew into a very, very big business. I think when I joined, there was about 12 of us. When I left, there was 2,700 employees. So it became a very big enterprise. And through this process, we built Payroll, we rolled it out in over 100 countries. And through that process, we've learned a ton of stuff. And then after that, I got involved in a lot of innovation work. So really new products, nothing to do with payroll per se, but still in the talent space and the HR space, and really learning what it takes to take new technology. So this is now the really shiny stuff, all the cool things that you hear about, and try to make products that are actually useful for something with the technology. And again, not as easy as you'd think. You have money, you have technology, you have smart people, and still it's hard to give end users what they want. So anyway, long intro, but this is the context for what I'm going to talk about.
Thanks,
No,
Jerome.
very good.
Sorry, before you start, I just want to say that we would like it very interactive. So if you do have any questions during the webinar, please, drop them onto the Q&A section or in chat, and then I can ask Jerome and Sachin as we go through. So I'll leave it up to you guys now. I'll come off camera. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel. And thanks, Jerome, for the intro. So look, we're going to kind of go in a bit of and I know 4th of May, be the 4th with you, all that stuff, whoever follows it, was a couple of days ago. And we're going to go in a bit of reverse tangent here, because we'll start with all the fancy things we hear about in technology and move into payroll. So Jerome, every day, everybody, and over the last few years, when we're lost, when we kind of can't find our way, we go to our phone and go, "Hi Siri, hi Alexa, show me my way." Right? So if we look at why people, or what people are looking at in terms of making their life easier, how will Alexa, Siri, whatever, solve my problem?
Well, have you tried running your payroll with Alexa?
I have not yet.
Yeah, I mean, this is the so-called age of artificial intelligence, AI. You can't actually read anything without somebody mentioning AI as the new thing that's going to solve the world's problems. And maybe it needs to be demystified a little bit, but AI is nothing but pattern recognition, right? If we're being honest with ourselves, this is stats 101. This is the curve fitting stuff we did at college, university, or whatever. And it's now done on very powerful computers, but fundamentally the problems that it solves haven't really changed, right? So it's pattern recognition. So the question really is, can artificial intelligence or pattern recognition play a role in solving payroll issues? And I think it can, but I think it's tempting for us to always think about technology or framing all the solutions for the world in terms of technology is going to solve them for us. But when you think about where the problems actually come from, like the problems we're trying to solve, right? In the case of payroll, they are not natural problems. They're not problems that occur naturally in the world. They are problems that we create as humans. Our societies create those problems. Our laws, our legal systems, our tax systems, our the way we pay people, our social standards, our social mores are basically what drive payroll. Payroll is a completely artificial process. And when you're dealing with, and this is something that I learned when I was doing non-payroll stuff, but when you're dealing with humans and trying to solve human problems, technology only has a limited role to play in that, right? It's like if you have a fear of height, for example, that's a human problem. It's a human challenge. Technology can only play a limited part in possibly helping you with that fear. And so when you're dealing with all of these constraints that are essentially made up and historical in nature and continue to change based on politics and local economic pressures and so on, we have to be realistic about the role that technology can play. And so when you think about pattern recognition, specifically AI, for example, which is Siri or Alexa, what it does is it recognizes, you give it data, you teach it, well, it teaches itself on how to recognize certain patterns in historical data. So the question is, can historical data tell us anything about the future when it comes to paying people? And if the answer is yes, or partially yes, then yeah, AI can help. Personally, I don't think there's that much that can be done. I mean, there's little bits and pieces. Can you automate a support desk with AI? Absolutely you can, right? Because the questions that people ask about pay tend to be repetitive. So you can teach an AI, about those questions, you can give them answers, and you can can that into a bot, and you can deliver it without a doubt. But does it really help a payroll engine? Does it help encapsulate compliance rules, for example, and turn them into algorithms? I think we're probably a decade away, probably more, from anything realistic around that. Although all of us are looking into it.
Yeah, and look, there's a lot of talk about progress. There's a lot of talk about AI, machine-based learning, etc. So are we really in a phase right now in the world that we're making that much progress? Have we already got there? Is there a lot of room to go? And that's what you're touching on right now. So what's your view on that?
Wow, so that's interesting. First thing I want to mention, and it's a little known fact, that cloud computing was invented by a payroll vendor in the 50s, right? So firstly, I just want to establish the fact that our industry does drive a lot of innovation and has driven a lot of innovation. But your question is, are we making progress now? I think right now we have been in a lull in terms of, we've been in a slowdown in terms of pure technical innovation for a while. You know, we had mainframes, and then client server technology came in the early 80s. ERP took over the world, and most of the enterprise software progress, if we're honest, happened in the late 80s, early 90s. That's when things really, really changed. That's when all of your siloed software that came, you know, that was basically hand-coded for you by IBM and those big companies got replaced by off-the-shelf software. We call it off-the-shelf, but then it takes 5 years to implement. So yeah, we know what that means. But that was a big shift, right? And client server conceptually emancipated companies from the power that these big mainframe companies had. And I think that really changed the way people thought about IT. It was the advent of CIOs. There weren't really CIOs before that time. And suddenly companies had this thing, which was, you know, IT, and they could do things with it. And we got caught on that same wave, and amazing things happened. So SAP, for example, built a global payroll engine. And still to this day, it is the only global payroll engine that's ever been built. One that actually works, right? And what has happened since? Very little. Very little, at least not on that scale. There's been a lot of new payroll companies, a lot of new HR companies, and you know, the very siloed ones, the very specific ones tend to be the most innovative ones. So you pick one problem and you design the hell out of the solution. You come up with an amazing solution. So point solutions in the HR space have tended to be more innovative than, you know, people like us who generally provide a lot of services for a lot of clients in a lot of regions. Obviously, the emphasis is different. So the question that so that's one thing. The second thing that happened, I would say the major innovation in the payroll space in the last 15 years has been aggregation of payroll. And aggregation of payroll, if I put my technology hat on, it's not a great solution. It's a suboptimal solution. Because it's trying to provide a solution in a very complicated, messy world. And it does the best it can to provide a coherent view of something that is extremely complex and fundamentally not very coherent. So the next question is, can we actually make it coherent? Is there a way that we can go one step further than aggregation and actually control and manage all aspects, all layers of the process, from the very beginning of data entry into a gross payroll engine, all the way to the global, you know, slice and dice reporting, all the cool stuff that we all like to see. And I think right now, I know at least of 3 or 4 companies that are investing a lot of effort in building that. So going beyond aggregation. I think now is the time that we're going to start seeing some of those innovations, probably in the next year or two. It's hard to tell to what extent they will be different from the previous generation, honestly.
And look, Jerome, payroll, to be honest, we all get into it because for us, it's all about making sure that we have all our staff paid accurately on time every week, fortnight, month, right? And innovation is important as long as it doesn't disrupt making that compliant piece there. So we talk about what you said around the SAPs of the world, the ERPs, but everybody starts to go into their mold and say, look, we've got to keep delivering the compliance piece. So, you know, is anything interesting happening in the world right now that creates the excitement of what's to come? Or do we think about technology as just making the current compliance better?
Yeah. Well, so let's dig a little bit in why is technology so hard for payroll? The technology itself is not complicated. In fact, we've had the tools to build very, very efficient payroll engines for at least 20 years. That isn't what's preventing us from really standardizing and expanding and scaling payroll out globally on very, very efficient platforms. What the real challenge is encapsulating the compliance requirements of every country, every region within every country. And then obviously you have every industry, you have unions, you have customers, and within customers, you have different rule sets. So you essentially have this onion, these layers of compliance that exist, that make up the real world, and encapsulating that in a way that you can efficiently consume during while a payroll engine is running, that it can basically call upon these rules, call upon these interpretations, and calculate payroll accurately. That is a problem that hasn't been solved. Now, people do it in different ways. You can have 100 people that are doing research, and you have business analysts that translate those findings into rules, and then coders that update code, and testers. That's essentially what's happening today. That's incredibly inefficient. It doesn't scale, right? So if you want to enter one more country, you've got to get another researcher, another BA, another coder, another tester, etc., etc. So I think some of the really cool innovation now is about encapsulating knowledge. How do you encapsulate knowledge in a systematic way? If you can do that, everything else is relatively understood and trivial. So I think that's really where technology hopefully is going to help.
Yeah, cool. And look, I know we wanted to make this session quite interactive, and we've got a couple of questions already coming through. So I'm going to hand it over to Mel to perhaps phrase them off for Jerome.
Thanks, Sachin. Okay, so do you believe there should be a greater payroll audit and compliance umbrella to help companies and individuals? There's a lot of non-compliance and inefficiencies, a lot of savings to be made.
Whoa, that's an interesting question. I could take this in a number of directions. Firstly, there's always a debate about what compliance means. People interpret that word in different ways, which always surprises me a little bit. Melanie, can you just maybe repeat the question a little bit slower? I just want to make sure I answer it accurately.
Is that the Essex accent again? So let me try. Do you believe?
Difficult question.
And an Essex accent. Do you believe there should be a greater payroll audit and compliance umbrella to help companies and individuals? There is a lot of non-compliance and inefficiencies, a lot of savings to be made.
Honest answer is I don't know. I think compliance ultimately is a reflection, like I said, of social and political standards, and having greater compliance means being more closely aligned to those standards, which is what you want, but it also means a more static industry, right? What I see is a tension between vendors and those who manage payroll and manage people, and those who create the rules. And if we don't keep pushing for more simplicity and more standardization, these rules, they almost create themselves. Like if you leave them to their own devices, rules get more and more complicated. Every year, new layers of rules on top of existing rules come out. And I think that trying to be compliant to those rules in a passive sense, where it's basically, I'm just trying to comply, I think that actually does everyone a disservice in the end. Because what it does is it encourages those that are making the world more complicated to create more complication. And I think in some cases, and I've seen this, In some countries, for example, small countries, where the legislators came out with these insane, complicated rules for payroll, and the vendors in the country said, no, we're not going to do it. We don't know how to do it. We don't have the technology to do this. It's too expensive. We can't be profitable businesses. We can't run payroll. We can't build and maintain the software with these crazy rules. And the legislators have actually backed away from it. So I don't know if I'm answering the question, but my point is that there's always a tension between the craziness of the world that just keeps generating more complexity and more rules, and the engineering kind of hat of all the vendors and also the practitioners who are saying, this is insanely complex. Can we please simplify? Can we go back to something a little bit more sane? And I think that tension is really important.
Actually, I'd like to kind of, that's a really good point, and work on that. So you talk about, and we all talk about, and whoever was asking the questions, thank you very much. We all talk about the compliance, the complexity, the whatever. And is that a myth that technology solves everything? And how do you actually get technology to play a part in it? Because, you know, someone's just asked as well, you've got bespoke systems you may have in your organization. You're a multi-country company. You're using different best of breed systems. How does tech help me solve my payroll issue globally? Can it?
I think you need to be realistic. And so actually a global payroll and technology applied to global payroll is, when I say global payroll, I distinguish that from local payroll within a global ecosystem. So global payroll is, let's say, 50 countries where you're running payroll, right? And when you step back away from it, you can call it global, but really it's local. It's always local by definition. But when you consider it to be a global thing, you typically want to have global reporting. You want to have some global insights, like what is this data telling you? And I remember this was maybe 10 years ago when we were rolling out, you know, Global View at the time, and we probably had 60 or 70 countries already. And a lot of our salespeople would come to me and say, our prospects want to know what global reports we have. We don't have enough global reports. And I kept saying, okay, give me an example of a global report. Just give me an example. Like what do you want to understand? Like, I'll build it. And we would never get a straight answer. It was like, well, they just want to see global stuff. Like what? Like a birthday list? No, we don't want a birthday list. That's ridiculous. Okay, so what then? Basic pay? Well, yeah, okay. What currency do you want it in? Oh, yeah. And you know that basic pay, the way it's packaged in France and Japan is different, right? So when you're looking at basic pay, they don't actually mean the same thing. So even if you convert them to the same currency, you're not comparing apples with apples. So then I took 2 of my BAs at the time, and I sent them on this mission. I said, you're going to go and find out what it is that a global report is. And after like 6 months, they came back and said, look, we have a bigger problem than this. We couldn't find any field, any data field that is consistently the same across all countries, except one. Out of the hundreds, thousands of fields we have, there was one that was the same in every country, that was understood the same, interpreted the same, had the same meaning. And that is cost center. Isn't that funny? So none of the data that relates to people is consistent across countries. None of the data that represents pay is consistent across countries. And again, I'm not saying that the concepts are not the same, like there's overtime in every country, yes, but overtime isn't earned in the same circumstances. So when you're looking at an amount, it doesn't mean the same, right? If you earn $50 of overtime and I earn $50 of overtime, they mean different things. Maybe for you, it meant that you worked 20 minutes, you know, you arrived 20 minutes early, but for me, maybe I had to work 3 extra days. So saying that you earn $50 of overtime is actually not very meaningful without the context. And so my long way to say that we're still, and this is actually what made me think of the title for this, you know, the world is not flat, is actually exactly this. And Thomas Friedman, who wrote that famous book, The World is Flat, right? Which I vehemently disagree with almost everything he wrote in there. because that book came out at the same time that we were building this global platform. And so it flew in the face of everything we experienced. Everything he said was basically the opposite of what we saw. He was saying everything standardized, software is standardizing everything, workflows basically mean that, whether you're in China or in India or in the US, everything works the same. It's entirely false. The software is the same, yes. The way it's implemented is completely different. And the reality behind it is also completely different. So I think back to your question about, global payroll technology, I think we as humans need to have realistic expectations about what it means to be global. And being global doesn't mean being one thing. Being global simply just means I'm able to do many things in a concerted manner, in a way that is orchestrated, in a way that I can manage, in a way that doesn't present unknown risks. I think that's what global payroll realistically means. And I don't see countries converging, I see them diverging. If I look at all the rules over time, France, where I'm originally from, UK, where I've done a lot of work, they're not getting closer. The rules are not getting closer, they're getting more apart. And, even Australia and New Zealand, we always talk about them like, New Zealand's part of Australia. Isn't it part of Australia now? Just kidding.
Not yet, if I'm
right.
Quite right. Yeah.
But even them that are so close culturally and legally, the legal frameworks, ex-British colonies, it's all the same. But they're not converging, they're diverging. Slowly, but they are diverging. So technology is not going to solve that.
So let me then now filter it down into something that you and I work every day with, Jerome. And I hope some of our listeners also have the experience of the same, that we currently pay 6 million pay slips an annum. We at Pay Group have 41 countries that and nothing this is confidential, 41 countries that we, have a sandpit. If we look at how we improve our own lives, and then we take that from our perspective to what the globe perspective is and what is the industry asking for, and you look at the world map and you make it translucent and so it's a crystal ball, what do you see?
Whoa. So I think in a medium term, I think we're going to have more solutions that are more flexible to manage more countries. And what I mean by that is that, since this is a history lesson, apparently this call, right? This was about the evolution of payroll. For those that are familiar with the concept, the system of record, and originally came from database design, relational database design. Sorry to get technical, but that's where it came from. And the concept of normal forms, which basically said that a piece of data should never be repeated if you can avoid it. And this is back in the late 60s, early 70s. And in those days, the constraints were, we don't have enough disk space, we don't have enough RAM memory, we don't have enough CPU power, and we don't have, and writing software is expensive. So we can't just write more software to check the validity of data and the cleanliness of data. So this was really designed, it's almost like a thought experiment. Like, if we were to build a perfect system, how would we build it? And what happened was, all the big vendors, Oracle, PeopleSoft, SAP, Workday, all of them, including us, took that to heart and said, okay, let's design HR systems, system of records that are based on this concept. And the reality is that those are great for when the data is clean. But when the data is messy, which is what we find with global payroll, those systems become huge constraints, because now you're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole, right? You've designed this beautiful round hole and all you're seeing is square pegs. And so what you end up doing is digging little divots in your hole wherever you can so you can fit your square peg. And by the time you're done, your system is messy anyway, because you've actually broken every rule that you actually created in the first place. You had to, otherwise there's no way that that data would actually fit in there. So another way to do it, which is what I think new vendors are starting to do now, is to say, you know what, forget all about this. Let's just build what works at a local level and then figure out how to make it clean and intelligible, understandable, and orchestrated at a meta level, at the next level. So I think that is definitely what's happening right now. Or, you know, some of the developments that we're doing on our next gen platform, it's very much based on these concepts. And the technology we have now really helps us achieve that. 10 years ago would have been really difficult. But the real far future, the stuff that I have no idea about, honestly, I'm just taking a wild guess. I think that everything is about consumerism, and we as consumers, and our children especially, I see it in my kids, they see themselves as consumers, and the world is designed around that concept of I am the consumer and I will consume what I need in my time when I want it, and I will choose, and it will be served to me. It will be delivered to my door, literally, in the US at least. And they grow up thinking that. And when these kids are going to end up in an enterprise and they're going to be told, give us your data. Like, what? My personal data? You want my personal data? Why do you need my personal data? Well, we need to run payroll. That doesn't make any sense. I control my personal data. Why should I give it to you? And then when I change jobs, I need to give it to the next guy, and then the next company, and the next company. This makes no sense. And, you know, crystal ball, if LinkedIn had more imagination, they would become the system of record. And what would happen is you, as a LinkedIn user, would have full control over your personal record. And when you move from company A to company B, you simply you switch off company A. They still have access to that slice of history when they paid you, but they no longer have full access to your record. And you switch it on for company B and you say, here's my data, use it. And then there is a world of vendors who provide payroll plugins that can all be used on, you know, the central LinkedIn data, and data is run. And that's it. And why would you choose a vendor versus another one where you, as the consumer, make that choice? And why would you make that choice? Why would you care who runs your payroll? Because those payroll vendors are not going to be selling you payroll. They'll be providing you payroll like a utility, but they'll be selling you financial services. They'll be selling you things that actually help you in your life. Because getting paid, adding up your earnings and, you know, and then deducting tax really doesn't add any value, if we're being honest. The stuff that adds value is helping you buy a house, helping you buy a car, negotiating cheaper insurance rates, you know, getting your money faster, et cetera, et cetera. This is where payroll vendors, I think, have to go.
It's, you know, and Jerome, about 2 minutes ago, you raised the point of square peg, round hole. And sorry to, you know, no offense to you, but the image I went to was Hidden Figures and the NASA project and how they did that to get the peace firm. And I know it sounds a bit funny, but that's what it actually is in most instances. Where is your solution without technology to find a way out of a problem? So when I take that and apply it to payroll, we've all had an experience, and I can see a lot of chat coming through and a lot of questions coming through. Payroll has been through its journey. Technology has evolved around it, not perfected with it. So payroll as what one would say a cultural artifact. How does technology play a place in that?
Yeah, I mean, we're going back to, I guess, the beginning of our discussion. Payroll is purely a cultural artifact. Payroll is like tipping, right? Tipping practices. You go and drink a coffee on a terrace. Do you tip? How much do you tip? Well, it depends. What's the rule? There's no rule. If you want to understand the rule, you've got to understand the history of the country you're in, right? And not just the long history, I'm talking about even recent history, right? So now I live in the US, still blows my mind that I have to tip. Why do I have to tip? Why don't they pay these people? I mean, you're a waiter, you have a job. Well, it's just it's an economic system. It's everything, right? The fact that healthcare is different in every country means that the person who pays for healthcare, the money that is used for healthcare comes from a different source. And so if you as a waiter in a restaurant have to pay for your own healthcare, for example, then you need additional income to do that. And where is that money going to come from? Well, that's what tips are used for, partly, not just that, but I'm just saying. But if you're in Sweden or in Japan, it's considered rude to tip people.
Yep.
Right? So, don't do it. But yeah, they have free healthcare, so they don't need to be tipped. And they don't, so payroll is exactly the same. It is entirely cultural, right? Whether you get overtime, whether you don't get overtime, even how often you are paid is a political thing, right? Do you get paid monthly, fortnightly, or bi-weekly? Daily? In South Africa, where I worked for a long time, a lot of the miners got paid daily. But it's about control, it's about trust, right, between employer and employee. It is about what was negotiated between the labor, the workforce, and the capitalists, the people who own the production. So there is nothing more cultural than payroll in business, really. Everything else is regulated. You think about accounting, you have GAAP or whatever it's called now, right? When I studied it was called GAAP. But basically everyone around the world agrees on how to do double entry bookkeeping and basic financial reporting. It's not a debate. It's not something that changes every year or every month or every election, right? But you look at payroll, it's negotiated on a constant basis. Like in Australia right now, right? There's massive political infighting around casuals and the way to treat casuals. But this is not about payroll. This is about how we treat people, how we consider workers. So what can technology do about that? Literally nothing.
Correct. Correct.
But we have to be responsive. That's what we have to do. Yes.
That's a really good point. And you've raised some issues or commentary. And again, I'm keeping seeing these questions coming through. And it leads to the whole point about payroll, as you linked it to the adage of tipping, the cultural aspect of it. New York to Dubai to Singapore to Kuala Lumpur to Tokyo to Sydney to Auckland, huge difference, but the accounting remains the same.
Yep.
The payroll remains very, very different.
Yeah.
And you talk about technology as part of that. So can tech actually help in that? Or can it be the tech that is just being the enabler to what the human is thinking around fixing the problem?
So I think you're going to like this answer because you're a CPA, right?
Can we not insult me? But go on. Yeah.
Oh, well, I didn't make your decisions. I'm sorry about that. But yeah, you're an accountant by training, right?
I am, yes.
Yeah. And the transformation of payroll into accounting, in other words, what we talk about GL postings often, or whatever people call it, it is really the most crucial way to flatten the world, to come back to the world is not flat. If you're going to try to flatten the world, that process of posting payroll results to a standardized GAAP compliant GL system is how you flatten the world. This is the closest we're going to get to flattening the world. And I always tell my clients, if you really want a standardized view of your payroll, don't look in payroll. Look in your chart of accounts. Because that normalization and it's blood, sweat, and tears for everyone who's been involved. And I suspect on this call, a lot of people would have been involved in, at some point, in preparing GL postings or setting up GL postings or dealing with it in some way. It is extremely complex. It's a skill set that's really hard to find, because you need people who understand payroll, and then you need people who understand accounting. And that Venn diagram actually gives us a very small overlap. But when you get it done, once it's done, you have a very powerful tool, because you flatten the world. That's what you've done. By mapping every idiosyncrasy of payroll, every intricacy, every little local detail of payroll into a standard global GL, that's the closest you're going to get to flattening the world. So whatever technology is doing that for you, that's where technology really helps.
And Jerome, I'm going to take a pause here and allow Mel to help us ask some questions for us, because there are quite a few that have flown in. So Mel,
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So the first one is, what advice would you give to someone who has an idea in how payroll could be transformed and break away from the norm, but may not have the skills to develop the idea on their own?
They should talk to me.
I know the person asked this question very well, so I'll connect you to. He actually does think outside the box a lot, so that's great. Let's have a look. Do you think, I don't think we asked this one, so do you think that companies thinking of payroll as an administrative role would impede the development of technology?
I don't think that it matters much for the new generation. I think the new generation has expectations that lay outside of what companies think or care about. As I was saying, when my kids enter the workforce, they will expect certain behaviors from any system that they're expected to use. And I think that will drive vendor behavior and technology more than how companies consider payroll. I hope I answered the question, but that's...
Do you think, one of the questions I have from myself is that when we've run a few surveys, we found that that the payroll department is scared of new technology, like looking at the advances. So do you think that maybe because they don't understand the new technology, they're scared of their jobs and what that could mean, even though it could actually make their jobs a little bit easier? Or as you said a number of times, is it that we have to wait for the new generation to come in to push it forward?
No, I don't. I think it's conditioning, honestly. If you think about how payroll administrators are measured in terms of their performance, so how they themselves can show that they've been successful at their job and therefore, get promoted and, salary increases and so on. It's about predictability and reliability. Those are the measurement, what was that joke about? Nobody ever, claims victory when a payroll goes well, right? But it never gets celebrated. Hey, payroll ran without a hitch this month. Well, nobody cares. But if there's one problem, you're pretty sure that you're going to hear about it. And so this makes the whole payroll world completely risk averse. And if you have to weigh up two options, one is, I'm going to keep running my old payroll system, which is absolutely, falling apart and not flexible, and we hate it, but we know exactly what will come out of it. Or I'm going to innovate on this new payroll engine that can do all the cool stuff I want, but it might be wrong. You know exactly what people are going to choose. They always choose the same. They stay on the old stuff because they are measured that way. So we have to be fair to payroll administrators. That is what we're asking them to do. Now, if you change their incentives, you will change their behavior, without a doubt.
Okay, thank you. That's it from me at the moment, Sachin.
I'm actually going to take a punt here, Jerome, because you've been with Pay Group and by the way, for anybody watching here, this is not scripted. You've been with us for a few months now, but I'll link our journey in Pay Group to the next question. And that is, most people, most companies who belong in this space, who work in this space, look at the serviceability to a customer, and they forget about technology, but they consider technology as, I've got something that works today. I'm not sure if it's great, but I'll take it because I'm still getting a revenue from my, B2B contract, and I'm making a living. So when you look at that and the journey we go through, and the journey that we're going to go through with you, Jerome, and I wanted everybody else to know about our history and how we're going to go forward, because it may apply to them, it may not. Going from I would say, and I can say this because it's not going to sound bad, from a rickshaw technology model to something that you aspire to, which is not saying it's a Ferrari, but it's something that works really well for us. What does the state of payroll become with technology in the region that we deal in? And I have to say the region that we deal in is non-US, non-Europe today, may change later. So that's what I wanted to give the context on and ask you to respond, please.
Sure. So actually, you bring up a topic which is near and dear to my heart, which is how regions, what I've observed is how regions have different behaviors in terms of how vendors produce software and approach the market. So in the US, I start with the US where I'm based, single biggest unified market in the world, right? If you want to make $1 million, you don't have to even think outside the borders. You can literally launch your software today in the US, and that market will be enough growth for you for the rest of your days. You never have to go outside. And that has a number of, that impacts what you see, right? So you see a lot of vendors, a lot of innovation. You see winner-take-all behaviors, dynamics in the market, right? Because when you have a homogeneous market, once you have a really good solution for that market, you're going to win it all, right? There's no reason for you not to win it all. So you end up with very, very large players. And whereas you take Europe, for instance, where it's a fragmented market, but each one is big enough to nurture its own market. So France is big enough as a payroll country to have multiple large-scale vendors, but very hard for a French vendor to be equally as successful in the UK and vice versa. And we rarely see that, right? Without mentioning names, there's, right now there's a French company, a startup that's doing extremely well. That's basically, killing all the vendors inside of France. And I was speaking to them recently, and I was offering my, services for outside of France. And they were like, no, we don't want to go outside. Like, this is not something we're looking at right now, because the amount of disruption that creates in how you operate the software, the architecture, the service model, everything, it just isn't worth it. And so as a result, with Europe, you have the situation where you have a lot of mid-size, very good mid-size software companies, but they never get really huge. Again, with the exception of SAP, but SAP was an aberration. We're not going to see that again. No. And then you have Asia Pac. So I'm going to exclude China and India because those are actually very similar to what I said about the US, right? It's the same dynamic. You can stay inside of China, never leave China, and be the biggest software company in the world. You can do the same in India. But for the rest of Asia Pac, we have lots of countries, all relatively small countries. But so what happens there is it forces vendors like us, but many others too, to very quickly in their growth, having to look across the border, because you can't just stay in your country. There's just no scale there. And also your clients, for the same reason, because there's no scale in any given country, have also expanded their operations to multiple countries. So they're taking you on the journey with them. So you have no choice. You have to be multi-country. And so as a result, we're actually seeing a lot of really cool innovation coming out of Asia Pacific, not because we're smarter there, just because it's necessary. And necessity is the mother of all inventions, and it's absolutely true. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that is something that I see. There's a very, very clear pattern there. And because I look around here in New Jersey and I see all these payroll companies are doing super cool stuff. And I'm going, wow, this would be so cool if we could run this in Singapore. but they have no interest to be in Singapore. Why should they? You know, they could go to Pennsylvania and that would actually generate 3 times more revenue for them. So why would they go to Singapore? And so that innovation tends to stay inside the US.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I guess I kind of go back to the thing that the region of APAC, for those who have lived there or who haven't, and those who need to know about it, is you may find and Jerome, you're right, the India, Chinas of the world are quite separate. You can be insulated in them and not have to worry about what's outside them. But everything else around Asia Pacific is that whole piece around how it works together. And, you know, you put a payroll tech in Singapore and you got 5 million people living there, you better capture 80% of market. And we know somebody in Sri Lanka who captures 80% of market in their payroll tech. That's great, but what next, right? How do you keep innovating? How do you keep transforming? So you've got to keep thinking about how you're going to grow, how you're going to innovate. So that's a really great point. And look, I'm now going to go into some weird words that I don't get, but I'm going to say it because I hear it. And by the way, there's lots of great questions still, and we'll ask them soon. But I hear about blockchain, I hear about crypto, and I hear everybody try and link that to payroll. And I hear everybody saying, well, why can't I do my payments through blockchain? And why can't I have cryptocurrency to pay my staff? And perhaps you could give us a Dummies 101 guide into what that means in payroll, please.
Sure, I can try. I mean, actually, that fits in well with the conversation because it seems that there is no objective opinion about crypto. It's become a political statement more than anything else. So even the definition of crypto, people will argue about. So I'll give you my definition. But I mean, it's a store of value. That's all it is. I compare them to pet rocks in a sense. It's like, you know, I have this rock, it's my pet rock, and, you know, I'm attached to it. And if you want it, you're going to have to pay me money for it. And it's completely arbitrary how much we decide to pay each other for this rock. This rock in itself has no value. Crypto in itself has no value. It's an algorithm. I mean, it's a bunch of prime numbers. That's really all it is. And the blockchain is really just a ledger, like an accounting ledger that happens to be a public ledger where every transaction is recorded. And it's recorded in a way that you can't go back in history. So you can just record new ones. So you can never edit something that was done in the past. It's so simple, actually. What's insane about it, and why I don't think it will have much of an impact on the payroll world, is that the method of ensuring that those this currency, if you want to call it currency, these assets, those coins, cannot be replicated, is through an intensive algorithm that consumes an enormous amount of energy and generates an enormous amount of pollution and heat in the atmosphere. So it's incredibly inefficient. And from an information theory standpoint, it has to be inefficient in order to preserve its uniqueness. Like, if it was efficient, you'd be able to make lots of them, right? So by definition, to make few of them, it has to be inefficient. It's an artificial constraint that's built into the system. And that right there is the reason why the price is going up, because everybody knows that there is a limited amount of coins. I mean, it's built into the algorithm. We know how many coins they're going to be. Now they're just mining the last few, but at some point we'll have mined the last one. That'll be it. And then you have whatever the number is, I don't remember, but you have, let's say, 1 million coins in circulation, those little crypto things. And the value of these things depends on who holds them and how many people want to hold them. You know, you've heard the story about the $750,000 pizza.
I haven't ate it, but go for it. Yep.
Oh, some guy in the US, back when Bitcoin was still seen as a currency, bought his pizza because the local pizza shop decided to accept Bitcoin. So he bought a pizza with Bitcoin. And he might have paid, I don't know what it was, but let's say 2 coins for his pizza. But of course, at the time, a coin was worth 50 cents, and now it's $70,000 for a coin. And so, but the point I'm making is that it's not a currency.
No.
Currencies don't do this. Currencies are designed to enable transaction. This is not designed to enable transaction. This is designed to store value, like a gold bar or a gold coin. And so as a result of that, until that changes, let's just say, there'll be zero impact on payroll, because payroll is not about storing value. It's about paying people with currency.
With currency and getting it on time. No, it's fair. And look, like I said, there's a lot of spoken messages about crypto, blockchain, but at the end of the day, it comes down to being compliant, paying people on time, how you do it, where you do it. You just got to do it on time. And Mel, I know we're kind of approaching the end of our session, but there are some great questions still. Would you mind if we just sort of read them out, and let's give it to Jerome and see what he says?
Yeah, fine. Do you want me to read them out?
Oh, sure, go for it. I'm going to go from Imran Majid from earlier. Yeah.
Okay. So we've got one, touching your point around personal data. Do you see a move away from your data being held by companies such as Google, Facebook, and Amazon?
Whoa, are we talking about anti-social media? Yeah, it's a good question. I think what Apple just did this month is probably a turning point in the industry. Regulators are starting to seriously look at it in the US. I mean, obviously in Europe, this has been on their radar for a while. And I think that, Google, instead of fighting Apple on this, so just for those who haven't been following, the entire advertising run model is based on selling your private information to advertisers, right? That's the model that all the anti-social media stuff has actually been built upon. And Apple put a stop to it. Again, there's different interpretation as to why they did that, but they did. And as a result of that, two things happened. Facebook is fighting it, and is fighting in a court of opinion in the US, billboards, newspaper ads, and presumably they will continue to fight it. Google, on the other hand, saw the writing on the wall and decided to align with it, and completely complied, not only complied with Apple, but has actually come out and supported the change, which means, at least for me, it means that Google is starting to consider a post-private data selling phase of its life, right? It's going to look at other ways of monetizing, still selling advertising, obviously, but other ways of monetizing. And that, to answer your question, I think is promising, because if Google and Apple are both driving in similar directions when it comes to consumption of private information, I think that gives us, humans, people, normal people, a better chance to regain and reclaim control of our data. But I wish I was certain about what I'm saying. I'm not certain.
Okay, Sachin, which question are we looking at for the last one? What one would you like me to, or would you like to ask? Because we've just got a couple of minutes left.
I think the one that I can see on the screen now with Tom right at the end is quite an interesting comment. So go for it, Mel.
Okay. As senior execs come to realise that there is valuable strategic insight locked up in global payroll data sets, do you think that realisation will finally force change in the payroll departments to unlock this insight by leveraging new technologies? So
I'd love for Tom to tell me what kind of insights he would expect to find in this data set, because this is actually, I think this is one of the key questions.
We can unmute him. We can unmute him if you like, and he can ask it directly.
Yeah, let's do that.
Can you? Okay, right. Talk while I work out how to do that one.
Yeah, sure.
Let me put you in a pickle, Melanie.
Let me just see if I can find Tom while you do that. You've put me on the spot now.
There you go.
We're talking about technology.
I know.
Yeah. No, look, I think the other questions, Jerome, all around. Oh, we got Tom. Hey, Tom.
I don't know if Tom's there. This is the first time.
Hey, guys.
Oh, brilliant.
Hello. Yeah, so my question really is around getting comparison data from payroll data in different countries. So where you've got various tax elements and so on that are being produced in different countries in different currencies, with different languages, different tax structure and all that sort of thing, being able to easily compare those data sets so you get a true cost or quick insight into true cost of employment for perhaps, say, developers in Ukraine versus a development team in India. And being able from that then to reveal insight about your strategic direction for the organization. So in a BCP environment under a pandemic, allowing the senior exec to quickly make decisions about where to make cuts, for example, based on the true cost of employment, and doing that easily with those data sets. So that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a really great question, Tom, and something that comes up often. So I'll just start by giving you an example. So what is the monthly tax rate in Singapore?
So am I still on?
Yeah.
I have no idea what.
I know, but it's a rhetorical question. The answer is zero, right? So, for example, Singapore does not deduct personal tax from payroll, and neither does France. I mean, France has changed now in the last year or so, but until very recently, it was also zero. And so herein lies the challenge, that if the frameworks were similar, you could be looking at tax data, for example, or on cost, as we call them, or employer costs, and you'd be able to kind of create these sections where you could say, okay, well, let's add, all the tax. Let's understand which is the highest tax country that we operate in, or let's understand which one is the one that cost us the most in social insurance, employer costs, and so on. The problem is the frameworks are different. And so the costs don't necessarily show up in the same way. And I go back to what I was saying about global reporting. It's really, really hard. And in fact, there are companies that make a living out of selling you that information because they have researchers who actually will compile this for you. And by the way, I'm not plugging them or anything, but there's a company called Oyster HR who just launched, I don't know, maybe 6 months ago. They're a startup. And that's exactly what they do. Well, it's one of the things that they do. But they give you a menu and they basically say, look, if you go in this country, this is what's going to happen. If you go in that country, this is what's going to happen. And they can source the workers for you, and that's their value prop. But my point is that this requires specialized research, and I don't think we're close to a point where we can just give you that information in a report. I wish.
Okay, that's interesting. I would, I'm not going to plug my company. It was a slightly leading question on my part, and I'll leave that there. But I think there are technologies out there that can standardize some of these data sets and give you a sort of consolidated global view to help inform the senior execs. And yeah, it's a challenge that we've come across, and something.
Yeah, no, it's actually, it's one of the more useful outcomes of payrolls, I would say, because payroll is not very useful. If you think about the value of payroll, there's no value except paying people. But all this process, all this data, all this checking, all this crunching, and ultimately you just pay someone. There's a bank transfer that happens, and that's it. You're done. And this residual value that you're talking about is, can we leverage this data to inform strategic decisions and so on? I think those are areas that we all need to research. In my experience, this is not something that's easy to standardize. I'm not saying we don't have the data. I'm saying normalizing the data is hard and takes specialized knowledge.
Sure.
Good stuff. Thanks, Tom.
Okay, yeah, that's great. It's a good conversation topic, that one. Maybe one we can pick up offline.
You bet. You bet we can.
Okay, so unfortunately we've gone a slightly over schedule, but it's honestly a fantastic conversation, so fascinating, and I feel like we could actually go on for another 30 minutes. So maybe we need to book in another schedule to go further with some of this conversation. So Sachin and Jerome, thank you so much for spending time with us today. What's the best way for people to connect with you? Is it via LinkedIn? We're talking about LinkedIn. Is it via LinkedIn or?
Yeah, LinkedIn's good. Yeah, LinkedIn's great. Or through email, or yeah, and You're right. We could talk about this for hours more, and Jerome has another few hours to go while we're in Australia about to sleep. So I'm happy to leave the lines open and give him the customer support line.
Well, thank you so much. I will share today's recording with everyone that has attended, and I'll pop in there your email addresses should anybody wish to contact you both. So thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you both next week. Sorry, not next week, next month.
Yep, absolutely.
Fabulous. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.